This is Heliox, where evidence meets empathy. Independent, moderated, timely, deep, gentle, clinical, global, and community conversations about things that matter. Breathe easy. We go deep and lightly surface the big ideas.
Picture this, right? You take the world's most articulate, just unbelievably well-read scholar.
Okay.
Someone who has somehow memorized every encyclopedia, every piece of literature, every single Wikipedia article ever written.
Right. A total genius.
Exactly. They can debate esoteric philosophy. They can, write a perfect Shakespearean sonnet in a matter of seconds, pass the bar exam without even breaking a sweat.
Sure.
And then you take that staggering, just unmatched intellect and you put it into a robot body.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yeah. You place this brilliant machine in your kitchen and you ask it to do something incredibly simple, like, hey, could you grab that fragile coffee cup and open the door for me?
It sounds like the setup to a joke, honestly. But the punchline is, well, it's actually what keeps roboticists awake at night right now.
Because what you watch happen next is this genius robot clumsily smashes the cup into a million pieces.
Right.
Then it gets its foot caught in a rug, loses its balance, and just repeatedly headbutts the door frame. Because it simply cannot figure out the physical mechanics of a doorknob.
It's totally lost in the physical world.
Exactly. It has the vocabulary of God, but the physical coordination of a drunk fly.
Which really highlights a massive multi-billion-dollar blind spot in the field of artificial intelligence right now.
Yeah.
We have spent the last decade entirely mesmerized by language.
And that blind spot is the core theme of our deep dive today. If you're listening to this and you've ever found yourself wondering why the AI on your phone can, debug complex software code, but a multi-million-dollar robot still can't reliably fold your laundry or clear a dinner table.
Which they really can't.
Right. Well, you are about to find out the underlying architectural reason why. The AI industry mastered language. But when it comes to navigating physical reality, our most advanced systems lack the common sense of a human toddler.
Or, actually, as we're going to explore today, they lack the spatial awareness of a microscopic worm.
A worm. Yeah, it's wild.
It is, because for the last few years, the prevailing wisdom in Silicon Valley was essentially brute force.
Right, just build it bigger.
Exactly. The assumption was that if we just made the language models bigger, fed them more text, threw more gigawatts of power at them, eventually a complete three-dimensional understanding of reality would just magically emerge from the words.
But the stack of sources we're tearing into today suggests that assumption is fundamentally broken.
Completely broken.
We're looking at a comprehensive taxonomy of AI world models, industry reactions from places like NVIDIA, and most importantly, a deeply provocative manifesto.
Yeah, the paper from July 2026.
Right, published by a team of neuroscientists and cognitive researchers led by Giovanni Pizzullo and Paul Sisek.
And reading through this manifesto, their argument feels like a bucket of cold water on the whole AI hype cycle.
Oh, totally. They're essentially telling the most heavily funded engineers on Earth that they have built intelligence backward.
They make an incredibly compelling case that to get robots to actually understand the physical world, we have to stop looking at text data.
I have to look at biology.
Right. We have to look at how biological organisms, from simple nematodes all the way up to human infants, actually learn.
So the mission for us today, for this public radio broadcast, is to tear down the current architecture of embodied AI, to figure out why it's failing, and understand how the entire field is desperately pivoting toward biology for the answer.
Yeah, it's a huge shift.
When I first opened these sources, I had this immediate visceral reaction to how the industry is currently training robots. It's like we're trying to teach someone how to ride a bicycle by locking it in a library.
That's a great analogy.
Right. We're making this AI read a million Wikipedia articles about the physics of bicycles, the history of the Tour de France, the exact metallurgy of the bike frame.
And no actual practice.
Exactly. And then we just shove it onto a real bike on a steep hill and wonder why it crashes immediately. We never let it actually feel gravity.
The irony is that the roboticists, they know this. In our sources, specifically the manifesto by Pizzullo and his team, the current method for building robotic brains is bluntly referred to as a very bad hack.
A very bad hack.
Yeah.
I mean, that is harsh language for peer-reviewed science.
It really is.
I'm assuming this hack involves taking the chat box we all know and just, bolting them onto robot arms.
That is the essence of it, yeah. The language-first architecture You take a disembodied large language model, an LLM, which only understands the statistical relationships between text tokens.
That's words.
Just words. And you retrofit it with actuators and cameras. The language model acts as the supreme commander, and the vision and movement are just passive peripherals attached as an afterthought.
Wow.
It receives a text prompt, looks at a static image of the room, and tries to guess the text-based motor command that should come next.
So it's like we have a blindfolded translator sitting in the driver's seat of a car, and someone in the passenger seat is just screaming out pixel descriptions of the road,
Yes.
hoping the translator guesses when to hit the brakes based on a dictionary definition of a stop sign.
No wonder they headbutt doors, right?
Exactly.
To fix this, the industry has realized that robots need something called a world model.
Which is like the biggest buzzword in AI right now.
It is, but it has a very specific, deeply mathematical meaning. In computer science, a world model is an internal simulator.
Okay.
It allows an agent to perceive its surroundings, act within them, and critically anticipate how its actions will change the future state of the world before it ever moves a muscle.
Right. I mean, I do this all the time without thinking. If I'm holding a glass over a tile floor, I don't need to actually drop it to know what happens.
Exactly.
I can run a tiny high-definition simulation in my head. The glass falls, it shatters, there's a huge mess. I anticipate the physics.
And our comprehensive survey source formalizes that exact intuition into a mathematical pipeline called compression prediction control.
Okay.
And to understand how this works, we need to dive into the underlying math they use, which is called a partially observable Markov decision process, or a POMDP.
POMDP. Okay, I'm going to take a swing at this because the math in that survey looks like alien hieroglyphics to me.
It is dense, for
Yeah.
sure.
But partially observable makes sense. If I'm a robot standing in a kitchen, I can see the counter, but I can't see what's behind the refrigerator.
Right, your view is limited.
My view of the world is partial.
Yeah.
But how does a Markov decision process actually handle that blindness?
So a Markov process is built on a very specific assumption that the future depends only on the present state, not on the sequence of events that preceded it.
Oh, okay.
Imagine a board game. If you know exactly where all the pieces are right now, you don't need to know how they got there to figure out your next move.
That makes sense.
So in our POMDP pipeline, step 1 is compression. The robot takes its high-dimensional, chaotic observations, like a stream of 4K video showing the whole kitchen, the lighting, the shadows, the dust motes.
That's a lot of data.
Way too much. So mathematical algorithms compress that massive amount of data into a tiny, manageable latent state. It throws away the dust motes and keeps only the essential geometry.
So it isn't literally saving a picture of a wooden table to its hard drive.
No, not at all.
It boils the image down to a mathematical abstract concept like solid object, flat surface, directly in front of me, height x.
Precisely. And step 2 is where the Markov math really kicks in.
Yeah.
Prediction. This is the dynamics model.
Okay.
The robot takes that compressed, latent state of the table, factors in the action it is about to take, say, swing metal arm forward, and uses probability to predict what the next latent state will be.
It imagines the future.
Yes. Will the arm pass through empty space, or will it collide with the solid object?
And if the probability of a collision is high, that leads to step 3, which is control.
You got it.
The robot's internal planner runs through dozens of these imagined futures and selects the action that avoids the collision and achieves its goal. Compression, prediction, control.
That is the theory. But when you look at the survey, you realize the AI industry is completely fractured on how to actually build that pipeline.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The survey categorizes the current approaches into a massive taxonomy with 3 main axes. Let's look at the first one, functionality. The field is split between building decision-coupled models versus general-purpose models.
I would guess decision-coupled means the world model is hardwired to one specific task.
Yes.
Like a robot designed exclusively to play ping pong. Its internal simulator only knows about the aerodynamics of a hollow plastic ball and the friction of a rubber paddle.
Exactly. And because it only models those specific variables, it is incredibly fast and efficient. It can beat a human champion at ping pong.
Wow.
But if you take that same multi-million-dollar robot and ask it to fold a t-shirt, it completely freezes.
Because it doesn't know what a shirt is.
Right. Its world model doesn't contain the physics of fabric deformation. It has no concept of how cloth folds. General-purpose models, on the other hand, act as broad, task-agnostic simulators.
They try to do everything.
Yeah, they're trying to learn the fundamental physics of everything in the universe at once: fluid dynamics for splashing water, rigid body physics for cars, soft body physics for shirts.
But the computational power required to simulate the physics of the entire universe inside a robot's head must be astronomical.
It's staggering.
Which brings us to the second axis, temporal modeling. How does the AI conceptualize time passing? The survey splits this into sequential simulation and global difference prediction.
Right. Sequential simulation is the intuitive way we think about time. Frame 1, frame 2, frame 3, unfolding step by step.
Like a movie.
Exactly. It provides excellent fine-grained control, which you need if you're trying to thread a needle, but it suffers from a fatal mathematical flaw called error accumulation.
It's the butterfly effect.
Exactly.
If the robot's prediction of where its hands is located is off by just 1 millimeter in frame 1, and it bases frame 2 on frame 1 and frame 3 on frame 2, by frame 100, that error has compounded exponentially.
Yeah, it spirals out of control.
The robot thinks its hand is hovering over the table, but in reality, it just shoved the coffee cup off the edge.
To avoid that compounding error, some labs use global difference prediction. Instead of stepping through time microsecond by microsecond, the model attempts to estimate a future state in parallel.
It just leaps to the future.
Yeah. It calculates, given this current state, in 3 seconds, the scene will look roughly like this, without calculating the interstitial steps.
Okay, so you bypass the compounding error, but you lose the fine motor feedback loop required for delicate physical tasks.
Exactly. You trade precision for stability.
Okay, so they're struggling with how broad the knowledge should be, and they're struggling with how time works. The third axis in this taxonomy has to do with space, right? Spatial representation.
Right. How does a string of code actually represent physical, three-dimensional space?
How many ways are they trying to do that?
Well, the survey lists 4 distinct architectures being used right now. We already touched on the first, the global latent vector, which compresses the whole world into a compact list of numbers.
Lightning fast, but it sacrifices physical detail.
Right. The second is token feature sequences. This borrows heavily from how language models work, but instead of chunking text into word tokens, it chunks images into visual tokens.
Sounds expensive.
Very. It captures high detail, but requires gargantuan amounts of data processing.
The third one mentioned is the spatial latent grid. The sources point out this is the backbone of a lot of autonomous driving systems.
Yes.
I'm picturing a voxel map like the video game Minecraft.
That is a perfect visualization. The AI translates the world into a 3D grid of blocks. It maps the geometric coordinates of the road, the surrounding cars, the pedestrians.
So it preserves the spatial layout perfectly.
Which is why self-driving cars use it to navigate intersections. But storing a massive 3D grid of your entire environment requires immense memory overhead.
I can imagine.
Finally, the fourth representation is decomposed rendering, utilizing explicit 3D geometry like Gaussian splatting.
Gaussian splatting has been everywhere lately. From what I understand, instead of using polygons to build a 3D model, the AI paints a scene using millions of tiny semi-transparent blobs of color or splats.
Oh.
It creates these hyper-realistic, photorealistic digital twins of a room. But if I'm a robot trying to catch a thrown ball, rendering millions of semi-transparent blobs in real time sounds like a nightmare. It seems designed for static environments.
You've identified the exact limitation. It creates a beautiful, static museum diorama. But the moment a dog runs across the room, the splats struggle to update fast enough to represent complex, unpredictable motion.
It's too slow.
Yeah. When you look at this entire taxonomy, you see an industry throwing every conceivable mathematical trick at the wall, desperately trying to force code to understand space and time.
Which brings up a glaring vulnerability I noticed in the survey. Let's say I'm an engineer and I build one of these world models using Gaussian splats and sequential time. How do I actually prove to my investors that it works? How do we measure if an AI understands physics? Because reading through the testing metrics in the sources, they seem fundamentally flawed.
They really are. Evaluating these systems is currently one of the most controversial topics in AI.
I believe it.
The survey details the standard metrics used, which heavily rely on evaluating the visual quality of the generated predictions. They use something called FID, fresh at inception distance, and its video counterpart, FVD.
fresh at inception distance. Let's break down what that actually calculates under the hood.
At its core, FID compares the statistical distribution of a massive dataset of real images against a dataset of images generated by the AI's world model.
Okay.
It runs both sets through a pre-trained image recognition network, often the inception network, to extract visual features. It's looking at the means and covariances of the pixels.
So it's looking at the math of the image.
Exactly. It asks, does this AI-generated video of a car driving down a street have the same statistical pixel textures and patterns as a real video of a car?
I see the problem immediately. If the AI generates a video of a car, and the lighting on the windshield is gorgeous, the asphalt texture is crisp, and the pixel statistics perfectly match the real-world dataset.
The score will be great.
But the car in the video is driving backwards, floating 2 feet off the ground, and phasing through a solid brick wall like a ghost.
Exactly.
The FID score might still be incredibly high. The math says the pixels are statistically beautiful, completely ignoring the fact that the physics are impossible.
The metric is completely blind to physical consistency. It measures visual fidelity. An AI can imagine a future state where a human hand is picking up a cup. According to FID, the skin texture is perfect.
But what's the hand actually doing?
Well, if you look closely, the hand might have 7 fingers, the thumb is bending backward at a 90-degree angle, and the cup is melting into the palm.
Ew.
Right. The AI has learned the statistical texture of a hand, but it has zero understanding of the skeletal kinematics underneath it.
This is maddening. To get a robot to navigate a living room, we're forcing it to predict the exact color value of every single pixel of what the room will look like in 3 seconds. And we're grading its success on how pretty those pixels are.
Not on whether it obeys the laws of thermodynamics.
That is a colossal waste of computing power. Are the engineers building these things realizing this is a dead end?
They are. The frustration is boiling over into the public sphere. The sources reference a highly circulated Reddit post discussing comments by Dr. Jim Fan, the director of robotics at NVIDIA.
Oh, wow. What did he say?
He wrote a piece outlining the second pre-training paradigm, and the community consensus summarizing his point was stark. As one user put it, world modeling is an entirely different paradigm from language modeling, and there's no telling how far away the GPT-3 moment is for robotics.
That is a staggering admission.
It really is.
Because the GPT-3 moment was that tipping point a few years ago where language models suddenly scaled up and went from producing gibberish to writing coherent essays.
It was the breakthrough.
Right. It was the moment the architecture proved it worked. And the director of robotics at NVIDIA is essentially saying, we haven't found that architecture for the physical world yet.
Because language modeling relies on scraping the entire internet for text. But there is no internet of physical interactions to scrape.
You cannot download gravity.
Exactly, you can't. And this realization has opened the door for a massive biological rebellion within the field.
Enter the cognitive scientists. This is where the July 2026 paper by Giovanni Pizzulo, Duotti Nuzzi, Paul Sisek, and their team comes in. AI Weekly framed their paper as a direct challenge to the frontier labs.
Which it absolutely is.
These are researchers who have spent their careers studying animal brains, looking at this multi-billion-dollar AI race, and basically saying, you've completely ignored a billion years of evolutionary R&D.
Their central thesis revolves around a deeply counterintuitive concept they call scaffold inversion.
Scaffold inversion. I want to make sure I grasp the gravity of this.
Mm-hmm.
Current AI, the very bad hack, uses language as the foundational scaffold.
Yes.
It maps the relationships between billions of words, creating a massive linguistic structure. And then roboticists try to hang visual cameras and motor controls off the sides of that structure, hoping the words will teach the robot how to move.
And the neuroscientists point out that biology did the exact opposite.
Oh, interesting.
Animals existed and navigated complex physical environments for hundreds of millions of years before language was ever invented. Biology builds a grounded physical world model first through continuous active physical interaction with the environment.
Moving around, bumping into things.
Yes. An organism learns gravity, momentum, spatial relations, and cause and effect with its muscles and sensory organs. That robust physical understanding provides the semantic foundation, the structural scaffold. Language is just a lightweight communication layer attached on top of it much, much later in evolutionary history.
So it's like we've been trying to build a skyscraper by starting with the penthouse suite.
That's a perfect way to put it.
We built this massive, incredibly articulate language penthouse hovering in the air. And now the AI industry is desperately trying to shove a steel foundation of physical reality underneath it before the whole thing collapses.
The paper uses human infant development to prove why the penthouse first approach fails. Consider toddler logic. How does a human baby actually learn about the world? They don't read a manual.
They act like tiny, chaotic scientists.
Exactly.
They crawl. They put absolutely everything into their mouths to test the texture. They sit in their high chair and drop their sippy cup onto the floor 1,000 times in a row, carefully observing the trajectory and the sound it makes.
Much to their parents' dismay.
Right. They learn spatial geometry by constantly bumping their heads into coffee tables.
They're actively probing the environment, generating their own data through physical interaction to train their internal world model. And the authors connect this developmental phase to a famous historical debate in linguistics known as the poverty of the stimulus.
I remember reading about Noam Chomsky and the poverty of the stimulus.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, the basic premise is that human children learn language, especially the dizzyingly complex rules of syntax and grammar, way too fast.
Right.
If you record everything a parent says to a child, the actual linguistic data the child receives is full of incomplete sentences, stutters, and errors. The linguistic stimulus is too poor to explain how a 3-year-old masters grammar. So Chomsky argued that the rules of grammar must be genetically hardwired into the human brain.
And the embodied cognition view, which this paper champions, reframes that entire debate. They agree the linguistic input is poor, but the child isn't learning solely from words. Their physical, bodily interaction with the world is the missing data.
This clicked for me when thinking about prepositions. When a parent points and says, put the block in the box, the child doesn't deduce the spatial concept of in purely from the audio waveform of the word.
No, they already have the concept.
Right. They already know what in means because they've spent the last 6 months physically shoving smaller objects into larger containers, feeling the edges scrape, realizing the object is now hidden. The physical action carved out a conceptual bucket in their brain, and the word in simply drops into it as a convenient label.
Beautifully said. The physical model provides the semantic anchor. The meaning of the word is rooted in the bodily experience of the action.
And the AI doesn't have a body.
Exactly. When an AI processes the word in, it has no bodily experience to draw from. Its words are entirely ungrounded. They're just symbols pointing to other symbols in a mathematical void.
So if the neuroscientists are right, and we need to invert the scaffold, if we need to build a robot brain that learns physical movement before it learns language, how does a biological brain actually compute that?
To answer that, the Pizzullo paper takes a massive zoom inward, moving from human toddlers to the microscopic world. They direct our attention to C. elegans, the nematode worm.
The nematode worm. We have tech giants building supercomputers the size of football fields, using enough electricity to power small cities, and these researchers are telling them the secret to artificial intelligence lies in a microscopic worm that lives in dirt.
I know, it sounds absurd, but their reasoning is mathematically exquisite. C. elegans is one of the most studied organisms in biology. We have mapped its entire nervous system.
Every single neuron.
Every single one. It consists of fewer than 400 neurons, exactly 302 neurons in the hermaphrodite. Yet, with fewer than 400 neurons, this microscopic creature possesses an implicit, minimally grounded world model.
How is that computationally possible? We're training AI models with over 1 trillion parameters, and they still get confused by shadows. How does the 302 neuron brain simulate a world model?
It works because the worm doesn't attempt to simulate the entire external universe. It doesn't use a general-purpose model to calculate the physics of falling rain or rolling rocks.
Okay.
It models a tightly pre-configured manifold of its own locomotor repertoire.
Its locomotor repertoire, meaning it only models the specific ways its own body is capable of moving.
Precisely. The sources reference a landmark study by Cato et al., utilizing pan-neuronal calcium imaging.
What is that?
This technique involves genetically altering the worm so its neurons fluoresce or light up when they fire. Researchers can literally watch the worm's brain activity in real time under a microscope.
Like watching a microscopic switchboard lighting up.
Yeah, and they discover something astonishing. Even when the worm is chemically immobilized, completely paralyzed, and unable to move, its spontaneous brain activity continues to cycle through specific structured patterns.
Oh.
And those firing patterns perfectly correspond to its physical behaviors. Forward crawling, backward crawling, sharp turns, its brain is continuously running simulations of its own body.
So it's dreaming about moving.
Essentially, yes. Its world model is not a map of the dirt. It is a map of itself acting upon the dirt.
That flips the whole script on how we build robots. Intelligence doesn't begin by opening a camera and trying to map the geometry of the room. It begins by mapping the internal capabilities of the self,
Exactly.
which leads me to a massive conceptual hurdle.
Okay, what is it?
If an organism, whether it's a worm wiggling through dirt or me walking down the street, is constantly moving, its sensory organs are moving too. When I turn my head to the left, my eyes see the entire room sweep to the right.
Right.
How does my brain know that I moved, and not that the room suddenly spun on a turntable? Does the worm have a dedicated circuit just to track that?
You've just struck at the heart of one of the most vital mechanisms in biological intelligence, and it is a mechanism that is largely absent from modern embodied AI.
Oh, really?
Yes. The brain solves the spinning room problem using two deeply linked concepts: the efference copy and the corollary discharge.
Let's trace the wiring on this. How does it actually work?
Imagine your motor cortex decides it wants you to reach out and grab a glass of water. It sends a command signal down your spinal cord to the muscles in your arm. But at the exact same millisecond, the motor cortex splits that signal. It sends a carbon copy of the motor command, the efference copy, sideways into your sensory cortex.
So it's warning the sensory department what the muscles are about to do.
Exactly. The sensory cortex receives that efference copy and translates it into a corollary discharge. Think of the corollary discharge as an incredibly precise prediction.
Oh.
The brain calculates, based on the fact that my arm is about to extend, I predict my eyes will see my hand move forward, and the proprioceptive nerves in my elbow will report a change in angle.
It anticipates the sensory data before it even arrives.
And here is the genius of the system. When the actual sensory data arrives from your eyes and your elbow, your brain subtracts the predicted corollary discharge from the incoming reality.
Wait, it subtracts it?
Yes. If the prediction matches the reality perfectly, the resulting equation is zero. The sensory noise caused by your own movement is mathematically canceled out.
So by muting the sensory noise I create myself, my brain can devote all its processing power to detecting changes in the environment that I didn't cause.
Yes. This continuous loop of action, prediction, and subtraction provides an organism with a pre-linguistic, deeply physical sense of agency. It is the biological boundary between self and other.
This perfectly explains the tickle paradox.
Oh, absolutely it does.
I've always wondered about this.
Yeah.
If I try to tickle my own ribs, my motor cortex sends the efference copy, the sensory cortex generates the corollary discharge, and it predicts the exact sensation of my fingers hitting my ribs.
Right.
It subtracts the prediction from the reality, so there's no surprise, no tickle.
Exactly.
But if someone else sneaks up and tickles me, I didn't send a motor command. There's no efference copy. The sensation is entirely unpredicted, the error signal spikes, and I jump.
The tickle paradox is the ultimate proof of the internal simulator at work. Contrast this elegant biological system with modern embodied AI. Because AI architectures treat vision, language, and movement as separate modules that are bolted together later, they lack this deep, integrated efference copy mechanism. They struggle to differentiate their own actions from changes in the environment because they aren't inherently wired to anticipate the sensory consequences of their own motors.
So they're constantly surprising themselves. They're robots that can tickle themselves.
That is a hilarious but very accurate way to put it.
But the biological inspiration in these papers doesn't stop with the worm. The sources dive into the architecture of mammalian brains, highlighting the work of Tony Prescott and Stuart Wilson at the University of Sheffield. They argue that if we want resilient AI, we need to mimic the brain's layered control architecture.
Yes, because biological brains are not monolithic neural networks processing every pixel and every thought in one giant mathematical soup.
Like the AI models are.
Right. Biological brains are strictly hierarchical. In mammals, you have the ancient subcortical layer structures like the midbrain, the brainstem, the basal ganglia.
The primitive brain.
Yeah. These circuits are not highly flexible, but they are incredibly fast, deeply grounded in sensory motor loops, and highly reactive. They handle the safety-critical behaviors necessary for immediate survival.
The subcortical layer is the emergency override. If I accidentally touch a hot stove, my hand violently jerks back before the pain signal even reaches the conscious thinking part of my brain. It's a subcortical reflex loop.
Perfect example. And because the lower subcortical layers handle all the rapid safety-critical stabilization and avoidance, the higher layers, the cerebral cortex, are insulated.
Oh, that makes sense.
The cortex, which is slow, highly flexible, and capable of abstract, long-horizon planning and linguistic thought, doesn't have to worry about the micro-adjustments of keeping the body upright against gravity. It can plan a route to the grocery store, safe in the knowledge that the basal ganglia will make sure you don't trip over the curb while you're thinking about it.
Whereas current robotics try to feed the camera data, the obstacle avoidance parameters, the battery management, and the complex language command like fold the laundry into one massive computational bottleneck.
Yes, all at once.
No wonder the robot freezes when a shadow moves across the floor. It's trying to consciously calculate gravity instead of relying on a subcortical reflex.
Exactly.
Are any AI labs actually trying to build layered, biologically inspired systems?
The sources detail a fascinating proof-of-concept experiment out of the Okinawa Institute of Science and Technology, or OS. A team of researchers led by Vijayaraghavan and Tani built a framework they call the PVRNN.
Predictive coding-inspired variational recurrent neural network. I need a translation for that. What did they actually engineer?
They engineered an artificial brain that learns much closer to how a toddler learns. The PVRNN integrates 3 simultaneous streams of data. Vision, a camera watching a robot arm manipulate wooden blocks. Proprioception, the internal data reporting the exact angles of the robot's own joints. And language instructions.
So it's experiencing sight, body awareness, and words simultaneously.
But crucially, it does not use the language as the foundational scaffold. Instead, the network learns by attempting to minimize prediction errors across all 3 streams at the same time, using a principle derived from variational free energy.
Okay, break that down for me.
Let's look at a microsecond in this network. As the robot arm physically moves toward a block, the network is predicting the visual change of the block getting closer, predicting the proprioceptive change in its joint angles, and attempting to map those physical changes to the linguistic command it was given.
Oh, it's actively generating its own efference copy.
Exactly. By physically moving, watching the consequence, and hearing the word, it dynamically constructs a grounded world model. The abstract word push becomes mathematically entangled with the specific joint torques and the visual displacement of the block.
The language is anchored to the physics.
Yes, it is active, grounded learning, not passive text scraping.
The neuroscientists have made a bulletproof case. Biology starts with a minimal map of self, utilizes efference copies for agency, relies on subcortical layers for survival, and then introduces language on top of a grounded physical model.
It's a beautiful system.
But let's look at the reality of the AI industry. Are the frontier labs, the Googles, the Metas, the startups with billions in funding, are they actually abandoning their language-first hacks and adopting these biological principles?
The industry is absolutely realizing the limitations of their current models, but they are far from agreeing on the biological solution. In fact, the panic over this visual ungrounding has caused the field to violently splinter.
Really?
Yeah, one of our sources outlines 5 competing paradigms, 5 entirely different philosophies on how to build a world model. It's an engineering arms race.
Let's break down these 5 tribes of AI, because they're placing massive bets on entirely different visions of reality. Let's start with Tribe 1, Google DeepMind. The sources point to their models like Genie 3 and Sima. How are they attacking the problem?
We can label DeepMind the pixel pushers. They are largely sticking to the philosophy that if you have enough computing power, you can force the AI to understand the world purely through visual data. Their primary representation space consists of pixel tokens and visual memory states. They use a technique called autoregressive frame prediction.
Which means looking at frame 1, guessing frame 2, looking at frame 2, guessing frame 3.
Exactly. But they run into the catastrophic error accumulation we discussed earlier. If you try to predict every single pixel in a chaotic environment, the model eventually gets overwhelmed by the noise and experiences model collapse. It gives up and just generates a blurry gray mush.
Just gray mush.
Yeah. To combat this, DeepMind employs denoising pixel reconstruction targets.
How does denoising prevent the gray mush?
They intentionally corrupt an image by adding digital static or noise to it, and then force the neural network to mathematically extract the original clean image from the static.
Oh, interesting.
By constantly training the AI to filter out the noise and reconstruct the core pixels, they force it to generalize. It learns to ignore the random rustling of leaves and focus on the broad, predictable visual events, like a person walking.
It's clever. But as we discuss with the latent approach later, predicting the exact RGB color value of millions of pixels just to figure out if a person is walking seems wildly computationally wasteful.
Very true.
Which leads us to Tribe 2. World Labs, founded by the legendary AI researcher Fei Fei Lai, their flagship model is called Marble. What's their philosophy?
World Labs pivots away from trying to guess 2D pixels in a video. Their entire philosophy centers on what they call spatial intelligence.
Mhm.
They believe the key to grounding AI is giving it perfect, explicit 3D geometry.
Okay.
They use the decomposed rendering representations we talked about, high-fidelity Gaussian splats and triangle meshes, to reconstruct photorealistic three-dimensional digital twins of physical environments.
So they're building an infinite, perfect video game engine for the AI to practice in.
Precisely. The sources detail tools within Marble, like Chisel, which allows developers to decouple the underlying spatial structure of a room from its visual style, and Composer Mode, which lets them arrange entirely new worlds.
That's amazing.
It is an astonishing technical feat. However, there's a critical biological flaw that Marble has yet to overcome. These hyper-realistic 3D worlds are intrinsically static.
Because rendering millions of moving blobs requires too much compute. So they built a perfectly grounded physical reality, but time is frozen.
Exactly. The environment itself lacks internal dynamic physics. If you drop a virtual ball, the environment doesn't natively know how to make it bounce. World Labs allows researchers to import external dynamic agents, like a robot control policy, into these static spaces to train, betting that mastering the complex 3D geometry is the most crucial step.
But the real world isn't a static museum,
No, it's not.
which is why Tribe 3 completely abandons the visual space altogether. Tribe 3 is led by Jan LeCun, the chief AI scientist at Meta, through their AMI labs. Their models include LeGepa and Lobeliem. LeCun has been a vocal critic of both the pixel pushers and the spatial rendering groups.
LeCun argues that biological brains do not reconstruct reality. Your brain is not generating a high-definition 3D render of the room around you.
Right.
Most of the visual data hitting your retina is entirely irrelevant to your survival. So AMI Labs focuses on low-dimensional, compact, latent embeddings. They use an architecture called JEPA, Joint Embedding Predictive Architecture.
I need a concrete analogy for how JEPA works in a latent space,
Yeah.
because it's hard to visualize an AI thinking without pictures.
Okay, think about reading a dense 1,000-page historical novel. When you finish the book, you don't memorize the exact sequence of all 300,000 words. You compress the narrative into a latent state. You remember the core plot, the emotional arc of the characters, the historical context.
No.
If someone asks you to predict what might happen in a sequel, you base your prediction on those abstract, compressed concepts, not by trying to guess the literal first word of the next book.
You predict the meaning, not the syntax.
Exactly. LeCun's JEPA applies that exact logic to physics. The AI observes the scene, compresses the visual data into abstract mathematical concepts, and then predicts what the next abstract concept will be, entirely bypassing the need to generate the pixels that represent it.
But if it's compressing everything into abstract math, how do they stop the model from taking the lazy route? If the AI realizes that predicting the number 0 every single time technically minimizes its computational effort, won't it just collapse into predicting 0 for everything?
That is the constant threat of collapse in latent models. To prevent it, Meta uses a sophisticated mathematical regularization technique called SIGREG. Without getting bogged down in the equations, SIGREG acts like a strict teacher, mathematically penalizing the network if it tries to compress different physical events into the same generic number.
Yep.
It forces the latent space to maintain a rich, diverse representation of reality, enabling fast, reconstruction-free physical control.
Tribe 3 feels much closer to how my brain actually operates.
Right.
But Tribe 4 takes the biological inspiration to its absolute mathematical limit. This brings us to Carl Friston and a company called Versus.ai with their models AXIOME and Genius. Friston is a titan in neuroscience, and his tribe is entirely built on the principle of active inference.
Active inference is arguably one of the most influential theories of brain function developed in the last 30 years. Friston's approach throws out pixels and latent vectors and instead models the world using object-centric factor graphs with slotted entities.
Slotted entities.
Yeah, the AI explicitly maps out distinct objects, a cup, a table, a hand, and calculates how they influence each other. But the truly radical part is what drives the system. The entire architecture is geared toward the minimization of expected free energy.
Expected free energy. Let's translate the thermodynamics into behavioral science.
In Friston's framework, free energy is roughly equivalent to surprise or uncertainty. From an evolutionary perspective, biological organisms despise surprise.
Naturally.
If you're a small mammal in the forest and you experience a sudden, surprising shadow, you are probably about to be eaten by a hawk. Survival dictates that you must minimize surprise at all costs.
How do you do that?
You do this in two ways. You either update your internal world model so the world makes sense again, or you take physical action to change the world so it matches your model.
So if I'm cold, which is a surprising deviation from my body's internal model of 98.6 degrees, I can either change my model and accept hypothermia, or I can take active inference.
Yeah.
I put on a sweater, changing the physical world to match my expected internal state.
Yes. Versus .ai encodes that exact biological imperative into mathematical algorithms. Their AI doesn't just passively watch videos, it actively explores its environment specifically to resolve uncertainty.
Yeah.
The efficiency gains are staggering. The independent validation report in our sources notes that the XIO model learns to play complex games in a matter of minutes, a process that takes standard reinforcement learning algorithms thousands of hours of trial and error.
That is the power of a biological architecture.
Yeah.
Okay, we have the pixel pushers, the spatial geometry builders, the latent space conceptualizers, and the active inference surprise minimizers. Who is the fifth and final tribe?
Tribe 5 champions the neurosymbolic world models. This is a fascinating hybrid approach designed to solve the hallucination problem. They take the fuzzy perceptual power of deep neural networks and fuse it with the rigid logical consistency of old-school symbolic AI.
Symbolic AI. This is the code from the 1980s, right? Explicit, hard-coded rules. If A is true and B is true, then C must happen.
Yes. Modern neural networks are brilliant at perception. They can look at a camera feed and identify a coffee cup with 99% accuracy. They don't know what a cup is. They just know the statistical pattern of pixels. So the neurosymbolic tribe uses the neural network to identify the entities in a room, but then it links those entities to massive structured knowledge graphs and databases like DBpedia or formal ontological frameworks.
So it looks at the cup and then queries a database that explicitly states, a cup is a physical object. It is made of ceramic. Ceramic is brittle. Brittle objects shatter when subjected to sudden force.
Exactly. By grounding the AI's perception in explicit transition rules and logical constraints, the neurosymbolic approach ensures the agent's reasoning remains completely transparent. You can audit its thought process. It uses symbolic reasoning to evaluate counterfactuals.
So before it acts, it checks the logic.
Right. Before it drops the glass, the logic gate triggers. So the knowledge graph dictates glasses shatter. My goal is to keep the glass intact. Therefore, I will not drop it.
Looking at this entire battlefield, DeepMind, World Labs, Meta versus .ai, and the neurosymbolic hybrids, if we apply the stringent biological criteria laid out by the neuroscientists in the Bazula paper, which of these tribes is actually on the right path? Which architecture truly inverts the scaffold?
If we judge them based on biological efficiency, the presence of intrinsic dynamics, and the abandonment of brute force pixel prediction, two tribes clearly align most closely with the neuroscientists' vision. LeCun's latent prediction at Meta, and Friston's active inference at versus.ai.
LeCun and Friston.
Yes. LeCun's JEPA architecture inherently respects the biological reality that brains do not reconstruct the world. They extract actionable meaning from it. And Friston's active inference directly mathematically encodes the fundamental biological drive, the imperative to act upon the world to minimize uncertainty.
That makes a lot of sense.
Both approaches abandon the exhaustive passive data assimilation of the pixel pushers and attempt to emulate the elegant low-power efficiency of a living organism.
It makes complete sense. Brute forcing the physics of a room by calculating millions of pixels feels like a uniquely Silicon Valley solution to a problem that biology solved elegantly with a few hundred neurons.
Seriously.
But as I read through the final sections of the sources, I realized that understanding physics, knowing that a cup falls or a door opens, is only half the battle.
Because ultimately, we're not building these robots to perform isolated tasks on a sterile assembly line or to live alone on a Martian colony. The commercial goal is to deploy embodied AI into our homes, our hospitals, and our elder care facilities.
And as the neuroscientists point out, when a robot enters human society, understanding the laws of thermodynamics is no longer enough. The robot has to understand us.
Which introduces the most complex conceptual leap in the text. The critical distinction between a physical world model, a PWM, and a mental world model, an MWM.
A mental world model. We're moving from simulating physics to simulating the inside of another person's head. Theory of mind.
Yes, and the text provides a brilliant scenario to illustrate why a robot requires a computational theory of mind to be genuinely useful. Imagine you have a service robot in your kitchen. A human walks in and says, "I'm running late, I need my keys." The human genuinely believes their keys are inside the kitchen drawer and they begin walking toward it.
Okay.
However, the robot, using its visual sensors, recorded the human leaving the keys on the dining room table an hour ago.
This is a classic cognitive psychology test, the false belief scenario.
Exactly. Now, consider a robot equipped only with a physical world model. It operates purely on objective physical quantities. It queries its database for the physical coordinates of the keys, confirms they are on the table, and its job is done.
Oh no.
It might just stand there pointing at the table in the other room, or worse, just passively watch the human open the empty drawer, become frustrated, and panic.
Because its internal simulator doesn't contain a variable for human belief. It just calculates keys are on table. It doesn't understand why the human is reaching for the drawer.
But if that robot is equipped with a mental world model, it represents the human's subjective internal state as a distinct variable in its simulation. It computes a complex social equation. I physically know the keys are on the table. However, based on the human's trajectory toward the drawer, I compute that the human believes the keys are in the drawer. Therefore, the human possesses a false belief.
And because it can simulate that false belief, it can proactively intervene. It doesn't have to wait for the human to fail. It can intercept them and say, actually, you left them on the table. Or it can swiftly navigate to the dining room and retrieve them.
Exactly.
The MWM bridges the chasm between calculating physics and demonstrating empathy.
This redefines the true meaning of grounding in embodied AI. Grounding is not just the physical ability to pick up a coffee cup without crushing it. Grounding is the social awareness that handing a coffee cup to a human requires subtle, context-dependent variations in physical movement.
What do you mean by context-dependent variations? Handing over a cup is just a trajectory, right?
Think about the physics of how you hand an object to someone, the trajectory, the velocity, the applied force. If you are handing a scalding hot cup of coffee to your boss, your physical movement is likely slower, highly deliberate, maintaining eye contact, conveying deference, caution, and respect.
Okay.
If you are tossing a plastic red cup to a friend at a loud barbecue, the physical movement is fast, casual, and informal.
The actual semantic, meaning the emotion, the relationship, is encoded directly into the kinematics of the movement.
Human communication is built on top of these incredibly subtle sensorimotor channels. As the paper eloquently states, we convey gratitude, assistance, disappointment, or urgency through the exact manner in which we move our bodies through space.
And a robot that is trained exclusively on internet text will never ever grasp that. If I type into a prompt, hand me the cup gently, the LLM has to try to translate the abstract text tokens of gently into a specific set of motor torques. But without a physical and social foundation, it's just guessing.
To achieve that, you need an architecture that seamlessly integrates the physical world model with the mental world model. The overarching conclusion from these researchers is a fundamental paradigm shift. To build safe, competent, data-efficient AI, the industry must dethrone language.
Wow.
Biological intelligence dictates that an agent must learn through shared social practices, aligning with human moral norms through continuous physical interaction in a shared environment, rather than passively scraping dead text from a server.
It is a profound realization that requires us to rethink everything we thought we knew about artificial intelligence over the last 5 years. We started this deep dive looking at a very bad hack, the industry's desperate attempt to force disembodied chatbots to figure out gravity by bolting them into metal bodies.
We examined the dizzying taxonomy of engineering workarounds that resulted from that hack, from calculating the exact pixel geometry of a video frame to rendering infinite static 3D worlds out of Gaussian splats.
Then we listened to the biological rebellion, the profound concept of scaffold inversion, the realization that biology builds the steel foundation of physical reality first and only adds the language penthouse millions of years later.
Right.
We looked at a microscopic worm with 302 neurons that continuously simulates its own ability to move. And we look at human toddlers who learn the conceptual meaning of a word by physically manipulating their environment.
We navigated the battlefield of the 5 AI tribes, seeing how architectures like Jan LeCun's latent concepts and Carl Friston's active inference are attempting to capture the elegant efficiency of living organisms, abandoning the brute force calculations of the pixel pushers.
And finally, we explored how mastering physical grounding is merely the prerequisite for social grounding. The necessity of mental world models that allow machines to simulate our beliefs, our errors, and our intentions.
It's a roadmap for the future of the technology, moving away from systems that just talk towards systems that actually live in the world with us.
So why does all of this matter to you listening to this right now? The next time you interact with an AI, whether it's a conversational chatbot generating text on your screen, or a robot vacuum stubbornly bumping into the same leg of your couch over and over again, take a moment to think about its scaffolding.
Right.
Ask yourself, does this machine actually possess a grounded understanding of the physical space it occupies? Or is it just executing a highly sophisticated statistical guess about what pixel or word should come next?
Because as long as the AI industry relies on language as the foundational core of intelligence, they will remain trapped in a digital simulation, completely unable to navigate the chaotic, tactile reality of the physical world. True autonomy requires gravity.
Which brings us right back to the image we started with. That incredibly brilliant scholar, trapped inside a clumsy, uncoordinated robot body, staring down at the shattered pieces of a ceramic coffee cup on the kitchen floor. We've spent the last 10 years and billions of dollars teaching machines how to talk with astonishing, almost terrifying fluency.
But if the neuroscientists and roboticists we discussed today are right, true intelligence does not begin with a word.
It begins with a physical movement. It begins with the friction of interacting with the real world. And it leaves me with this lingering, somewhat unsettling thought to mull over. If a machine can never truly feel the physical consequence of breaking something fragile, can we ever trust it to understand what the word fragile actually means? Heliox is produced by Michelle Brucker and Scott Bleakley. It features reviews of emerging research and ideas from leading thinkers, curated under their creative direction with AI assistance for voice, imagery, and composition. Systemic voices and illustrative images of people are representative tools, not depictions of specific individuals. Thanks for listening today. 4 recurring narratives underlie every episode: boundary dissolution, adaptive complexity, embodied knowledge, and quantum-like uncertainty. These aren't just philosophical musings, but frameworks for understanding our modern world. We hope you continue exploring our other episodes, responding to the content, and checking out our related articles at helioxpodcast.substack.com.